Hey everybody, thanks for watching. Today I wanted to walk you through the process of how I edit this sort of bland color image into a much more dynamic black and white image. I love this subject matter, this sort of curved arch above these windows along the staircase in this abandoned building. There's just so much texture in the brick and in the wood, bits and rubble and rocks that are just along the stairs. I just love urban exploration, and I think it really is a great setting for black and white photography. I feel like in a lot of these buildings, there's not a lot of bright colors. If you go into it just thinking about black and white and really just focus on the light and the different sources, you could come up with some amazing images. I feel like especially in this one, the whole building itself was just very, very dark. But then you would come up to an area like this with these windows and the sun's coming through, and your eyes are already so used to just the dark environment that when I looked out the windows, I wasn't really seeing any of the detail out there. Even in this image, as you could tell, some of the window parts are just not really exposed properly because it's more formatted for the inside of the building. But even myself, like when I was looking out those windows, I was really not seeing a ton of detail. My eyes have been accustomed to the inside, and that's really going to be the focus of this image. I love the powerful light coming in through the window. I'm not really concerned about what's outside. What I'm concerned about is just the staircase and the textures of the brick and the wood and just arch and just the overall layout. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and right click on this. I'm going to create a virtual copy just so I'm not messing with my original image at all. I'm going to reset all my presets back to the beginning. So this is the original image I shot in color straight out of my camera. It's a JPEG file. It's not a RAW file, which is going to be fine for this case. Of course, I would love to have the raw image, but at the time I had shot this in JPEG. So I'm going to go ahead and put the profile corrections on manually. It's not going to be able to load it from the image. But if you shoot on a newer camera and you have your raw metadata, the lens profile can automatically be loaded. But I know what I shot this on, so I'm just going to go ahead and make the adjustments real quick. Okay, and then as you can see here, that just sort of compensated for the curve of the lens and just made the image more to how it looked like in real life. So I got my lens corrections. I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'm going to come into basic. And then before I shift over into black and white, I'm going to click on the eyedropper tool. I'm going to click on this concrete, and that's going to do my white balance. It's going to bring the temperature up a little bit. Actually, when I do black and white, I like to bring up the temperature a little bit before I convert the image, especially in this type where I have some concrete. I feel like bringing up that temperature in this is going to give a little bit of a range where some of this is going to be gray, some of this is a little warmer, and I feel like when that turns to black and white, it just adds to a much more dynamic, and you can see the light a lot better. Go ahead and shift this into black and white. So not a huge difference. Next, with the exposure, some of the windows here obviously are overexposed, but overall I try not to make huge global adjustments. I like to focus in on areas. So what I'm going to do with the exposure here is I'm going to bring it down just a little bit. And then with the contrast, I do love contrast with black and white photos, so I'm going to bring this up. I'm just going to kind of keep an eye on it, and I'm going to go right about there with it. I kind of like what that's doing with it. Kind of darkening up some of those blacks, especially in these areas. I want really rich blacks. I don't like when they're kind of grayish looking, especially in areas where I know they were very, very dark. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the highlights almost all the way down. Just see here, yeah, that looks about good. Definitely like the highlights like that. With the shadows, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to bring them sort of all the way up, or almost all the way up. You can see right now this image, I wouldn't leave it as is. It almost looks like an HDR kind of style where you're trying to just have like brightness in all the image. Personally, that's not really my style, but I like to do this as a starting point because there's so many great textures, especially like in the brick and along this wood and these parts where it's like this paint is peeling and just these years of these buildings being used. Like I don't really want to lose that. So that's why I like to bring that stuff up, and then I'll sort of bring it down darker with exposure as I go on in areas that I think so. From right there, after that, I'm going to go ahead and click the option button as I click my whites. And then as you'll see here, as I slowly bring the slider, little specks of white will come on. Now I like to bring it up until I actually start to see these specks of white. Anytime I do black and white photography, I like there to be pure whites and pure blacks. It's a personal preference. I mean, it's your photos. You can edit them in any way that you want. But when I'm doing something black and white, I definitely want some things that are pure white and some things that are pure black. Do the same thing with the black here. I'm going to go ahead and bring that down. And as you see, little parts of it start to kick in. And I don't want to do it too much. I'm not going to bring it all the way like this or whatever. But I think just a little bit where those images or that part of that image is going to be pure black. Now going on to the texture. I do love texture in this image. There's going to be a lot of stuff in the wood, in the brick, in the stairway here. But I don't want to overdo it. just like with anything, I think if you do it too much, then it starts to just look strange. So I just want to bring that texture up just a little bit, and especially because this is on a global scale, I'm not focusing on one part of the image right now. I'm bringing up the texture in all of the image. So I only want to do it a little bit because there's certainly areas that are flat here or inside these windows and certain parts that I don't need there to be extra texture. I'm going to go ahead to the clarity. I'm going to bring that up a little bit just because I love all the little extra details in this one. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring my dehaze up a little bit as well. I know this image doesn't have like a lot of haze per se, but when I do black and white, think of the dehaze sometimes. It can make your blacks much more richer, or vice versa. I mean, if you take it the opposite way, this looks like a ghost image or something, and if you bring it all the way down, then, you know, I feel like I'm losing too much detail of that. But I really like how it takes the parts that are black, especially in this setting where I'm like, I want certain areas of them to be dark. So I'm going to bring it up to right about here. Okay, and that's probably what I'm going to be good with when it comes to global adjustments. There's a lot of areas that you can fine tune, and I just feel like if you're working on this global scale or on the whole image at once, then you just run into overdoing certain areas. So I have this image, and again, you know, I like where it's heading. This to me is not a final image. It's just too bright. When I was in that building and when I shot this, that was not the environment that I was seeing. So next I'm going to go up to the mask. And if you click on that little circle, you can add a new mask of many types. Your subject, sky, things like that. In this case, I want to add the mask to add in some more texture, especially like the brick and the wood. But I want them to be really localized. I don't need it in this area. I don't need it here in the window. I need it along these parts and in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select the brush. And then as you see, I can have the size of the brush. You can adjust it. I have my feather, flow, and density all around the 70s. Going to brush in. And I'm going to do this very roughly just so it saves time. When I was doing the original edit of this image, or if this was going to be my final product, I would go in there and be really careful with the parts of it just to really fine-tune those details. But I'm just going to generally do this so you get the idea of it. And it'll still look fine. So let me bring it down here on this wood. I just really right now I'm trying to highlight any of the areas that has this texture to it. Because when I put other masks on later, it's going to darken out parts of these parts of this building here, but I don't want these textures to be lost. Even though they're going to be in shadow, like I still want the texture to be part of the image. So I'm just going to bring that stuff down. Okay, and as I said, you know, if you were really doing this to be your final image, I would fine tune this a lot more. But generally speaking, you see what I'm going for. These are the sort of areas that I want to improve the texture. These parts of this wood here, so I'm going to do that. Okay, great. And then when you're doing a mask, you can then adjust the exposure, you know, all your stuff, but it's only going to be in that masked area. So I'm actually going to go down here and I'm going to go to the texture and I'm going to turn that up and just see until I about like it. Okay, like right there, I'm kind of liking it. Again, you know, even if I full blast it, it doesn't change too much, but you can see if I turn it down, it really kind of smooths things out. But in this case, this brick, it's, you know, it had paint on it, it had all this stuff, and it's peeling off, and like the pieces of the wood had paint on it, and it's peeling off, and things are falling off. The point of the image is to have texture. This isn't some silky smooth area or, you know, a new patch of concrete that would be completely smooth. Everything here is rough, and that I don't want to lose that in the photo. So I'm definitely going to bring the texture up on that. I'm going to pop the clarity up just a little bit. Yeah, that looks about good. Same thing with the dehaze. I do like to tweak that a little bit too. Again, I love how it just makes the blacks a little bit darker. Alright, so you can see on this mask here, it's been added on. This is the overlay of it, what I painted on. And then if I turn this mask on and off, it's just a small little tweak. You can kind of see here in the brick, but I feel like it's just brightening it up a little bit and a little bit of texture, and I just don't want to lose that as I go further along with my adjustments. So I like to start that because I can see it a lot easier now. Alright, I'm going to lay on another mask, so I'm going to go ahead and click the button next to create new mask. This time I want to do a radial gradient, and I really love the light that's coming in the arch of this window. That was, you know, the primary reason why I photographed it. So what I'm going to go ahead and do with my mask is I'm going to bring it out here first. I want to go ahead and click on the invert, because what I'm going to do with this mask here is I sort of want it to mimic the shape, not exactly, but the shape of the window itself, because I want that area to be the lightest part of the image, and then I want all the other areas around it to be a much darker. So that's why I inverted it. This part is going to be lighter, this part is going to be darker. And because that's how it was in real life too. Like the light source is coming in from these windows. That's where is the light. Like there's not light from back here, there's not light coming from over here, there's not light coming from behind me. All of the light is sort of coming in through these windows. I'm not going to get this mask exactly the shape of this window, but generally speaking, I'm thinking of like this is the way that the light is coming in. That's why I have it sort of set up to follow that curve, and then a little bit over here. So once I have that mask set, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to jump over to the exposure. And again, this is the exposure just on the area of this mask. It's not going to be a global change, even though this is a large mask. I'm going to bring the exposure down, and I'm going to bring it down quite a bit. Alright, so this is where I feel like we're really starting to turn the image into something much more dynamic and something that's much closer to what a finished product would be. This view here was what I was seeing inside the building. If I turn this off, as again, everything is so bright, so that's why I love using these type of masks. Really, this is a dodge and burn technique. This is done on a large scale, but with this mask, when I turn it on here, you're really seeing like, yes, this is what I'm going for. There is light up in these areas. There's light on this, in this back part here, but really a lot of that stuff was in shadow. We were coming out of the shadows into this part where light was coming into the building through these lights. And as you see, if I move this around, this would change the light source and stuff like that. But this is why I kind of want to just follow the sort of rim of this arch here. I think it has this great arch. This is where the light's coming in, and I feel like you're creating this very dynamic effect. So you have the light coming in off the wall here, coming down a part. This part's in a little bit of shadow. You have more light here on the stairs. And I feel like this image then is like, this is something that I was seeing in person much more. And this is what it was intriguing me about the space, that we were in this dark space and behind it there was a lot of light going on. Now because I darkened that image up, I want to go ahead and I'm going to put another mask in. I'm going to create a new mask, and I'm going to go to the brush again. And similar to before, I really like the way that this wood texture here is right in the middle. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that. But this time I'm really only going to focus in on this middle wood part. I'm going to leave the brick out of it. But I just want to highlight this wood part. And again, this is really rough. I would fine tune it much more, but it'll still be fine. And then with this, I want to go ahead and I'm going to bring the exposure up just a little bit. So you can see here again, not a huge change. We're basically just focusing on these areas right here. But I feel like some of the light is coming down from these windows here. The highest part, the biggest windows, the light is coming down and it's lighting up these parts. Where if I have this, it's almost, it's still there or whatever, but I think just adding this little highlights, just little tweaks, and I think this is what makes an image much more dynamic. Now looking at this, I've been loving this arch part the whole time, even since I first shot it. I just loved how big this was and the curve of it. But I feel like here, again, it's getting a little lost in my mask that I put on. I like the darkness of the brick. I like the darkness up here, especially on these stairs and this back part. Like, this is the interesting part of my image. This is where I want the viewer to be looking at and their eyes to be drawn, at this light coming in. I don't want them to be focusing on this corner here. But there is a little bit of like this arch that I do like. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new mask. I'm going to go ahead to the brush. And I'm just going to follow along this arch. And it's a little not exact again, but you get the idea. So I'm just trying to bring up this arch part here. And once I get that on the mask, I'm going to be modifying the area that's in red at the moment. And I want to go ahead and bring that exposure up just a little bit again. Just because of that big global mask I laid on the top that was darkening everything down. Now I want to fine tune it with these like smaller ones. And yep, you know what, I really like that. Again, okay, that's with it off, this is with it on. Not huge changes, not giant, but I feel like here, this part's really dark, it's getting lost. This arch is just a great focal point, so that's why I wanted to bring it up. And I have that big So here, if I turn that off and then I turn this off, you can see like this is really what this big one is, what's darkening this whole area or whatever, and I'm losing a little bit is. But I like to start with these bigger masks and then bring up the other areas instead of vice versa. Even though I knew about those areas that I was going to want to highlight them, I like to start with my bigger mask, darken the areas that I don't need to be my focal point, and then I look back in here and I see like, okay, what areas do I then need to highlight to bring their detail back out? And I don't want it to be too much. I don't want it to stand out too much. I just want to tweak them a little bit. So there you have it. That was my process of creating the black and white image of this, starting for something that sort of looked a little bland at the very beginning and hopefully now looks a lot more dynamic. Let me go ahead and jump to what was my original. So again, you can see here, that was the starting image. This is the finished product. Thanks for watching. If you like what you see, please hit subscribe to see more in the future. I hope you learned something that you can incorporate in your own photography.